Now we want to teach the mechanics of the bend and lift pattern, or the squat. So we're going to use this little dowel as our little tool. I've mentioned earlier about the foot position. I'm going to let you choose the foot position. Just a key thing is, at some point, you want them to be standing with the foot in neutral and ideally with 3 points of contact. We often hear in the squat, push through your heels. That is actually a misnomer. You don't want to push through the heels, you want to push through the foot. So the reason that's often used is because a lot of people, as they squat, because of the limitations in ankle mobility, the heel may opt to come off the ground, so we're trying to cue them to keep the heel down by telling them to push through their heels. It's just a cue, but ideally you want to push through the feet. So throughout the entire motion, you want to keep those feet kind of really securely planted on the ground, but there's good distribution of load through those 3 points of contact. All right, the first thing we're going to review is that mini hinge. So remember, on the mini hinge, if we look at a traditional hinge, it's initiated by the hips moving backwards, which then creates a reactive movement of the head moving forward. Now, that's fine for the deadlift, but we can't have that on the squat, because that displaces the bar's mass too far away from our center of mass, and we're going to fall. Right? So the idea is to create a mini hinge. The mini hinge is simply that same motion, but the hinge occurs without any accompanying forward translation, forward movement of the head. So it's simply the pelvic tilt to load the posterior chain without moving the head forward. So notice how the head moves forward on the hinge. This would be the hinge motion. I'm here, I'm hinging, and the head goes forward. On the mini hinge, the head does not move. Notice how the hips move backwards, but the head remains kind of fixed. That's creating a problem. The problem is arching the back. And this is what we often see in the gyms, that someone does a great job of creating that hinge, but then they create that lordosis in the lumbar spine, and they hold that all the way through the squat. You might say, what's the problem with that? Well, just to give you some perspective, a 2-degree increase in the lordotic curvature beyond neutral under load, like we're doing in a squat, can increase the compressive forces on the disc by up to 16% for every 2 degrees. Now, keep in mind, when you're looking at a clock, the 1 o'clock position, it's already 30 degrees. We're talking about 2 degrees. So any movement here to initiate that hinge without the forward head translation has to be corrected. And so what do? We create that pelvic correction. So we actually engage the abdominals to pull the pelvis through. It must not be this. It must not be accompanied with a knee drive, because now you've shifted your weight forward and you're going to fall. So to start with, I'm just going to go to this position right here. I want you to really create that big arch in your back. And if I say how to correct it, we engage our abdominals. Notice there's no movement of my knees. So repeating it. Contracting my abdominals to create that correction, get my spine back to neutral. So if I demonstrate it this way, here we are, there's the big arch, abdominal contraction, bring it to this position, there's the arch, abdominal contraction, pull it down. Now try and do it without any support of the knees. So come to that position, let's hold that position, big arch, correct. Now you're ready to lower it. So at this point, take and drag from the top. You're here. We are creating that hinge. We are correcting. Now we initiate the lowering, where now we allow the tibia to translate forward, and we're going to try and get to that figure 4 position. You watch, imagine these 2 sticks. As I go through my motion, hinging. So here's my hinge. I'm correcting. Now as I lower, the tibia translates forward. And I want you to kind of look at that orientation right there of the trunk and the tibia, and they should be somewhat parallel with each other, all right? Remember, ladies, you might not achieve that exact parallel position because you have proportionally longer legs in comparison to your upper extremity, but because you're not taking this all the way to the ground, you have a better chance of creating the figure 4 on a squat than you would, say, on a deadlift. So we want you to try and get that same level too, but a little bit of deviation from that, where a woman's slightly more bent over, is probably acceptable. Remember, the more you bend over, the more you're having to use a rotational force to come out of the squat, which means while your hips are coming up and forward, your spine is going up and back, and that creates a lot of shearing forces between the vertebrae. We would rather have the hips and shoulders move together. So rather than having this motion, which is called the T position, because this and that looks like a letter T, as I'm coming out of this motion, my hips are going that way, my spine is going that way, coming up like that. It's a lot of shear force in the vertebrae as they move at different speeds. We would rather have these moving more in unison. We're going to teach that. In terms of your cueing from the front, regardless of how wide you take your feet, we just want to make sure that that knee stays tracking over that second toe, second metatarsal bone without any collapse of the feet inward. Now, I know a lot of people will squat and say, well, let's put a rubber band around your knees. Let's put a yoga block between your knees. You're trying to fix a compensation, and it's not the way to fix it. You should be identifying why is that happening. Go to the source. The source is probably in the ankles or the hips. The knee is the consequence. So don't emphasize trying to force the knees out or force the knees in. Address the problem, right? Now, let me take you through the sequence. Because what's going to happen with a lot of people is traditionally this. You're going to see them dropping down, and they're going to be looking good, and they'll get to a certain point. And now if they want to go any deeper, you're going to see this happening because now they have no more ability to allow the tibia to translate forward. So I've got a sequence to kind of coach you out of that. And to coach that, I'm going to take you through the sequence. So I'm going to start off in that classic T position where I am vertical here and I am a little bit more horizontal there. And we know that to correct this, you've got to take this from this position more into that position. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to drive the knees forward until the heels feel like they want to come off the ground. At this point, you want to tighten up this area so that we can do what's called a torso hinge. This is a torso hinge. It is hinging from the fulcrum. This is not a torso hinge. That is thoracic extension. Look at that arch in your back. You want to stay tight through here so that I can hinge you in this capacity right there. So I have to basically hinge you like that, not like that. That's bowing my chest and bringing it up. So the sequence is from the T position, shift forward, brace, hinge, sink, shift forward, brace, hinge, sink. And you can kind of see how I progressively move towards that figure 4 position. So you want to teach that. Now, a sensation you'll experience, probably a bit of burning in your quads because you're loading a lot in holding that position. So an option is, if you're standing right by a high cable, you can actually put a few pounds on there, hold the cable right here, hold it close to your body. As you're going through that exercise, just watch your face. It actually takes a little load out of your body and allows you to actually move through that transition, through those sequences, and be able to do without burning out your quads. So there you have it. There's the basic mechanics of teaching the squat pattern. What comes next is loading with a bar or just using body weight to try and squat in different directions.